Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we getting on? Welcome to a brand new Starfield video. So, after much debate and waiting, and, well, a couple of months of waiting, we have a new Q&A regarding Starfield from Bethesda that came out last night. It's a little Q&A with Xion, who is the lead quest designer on Starfield. So, some very, very cool information in here. So, let's get into it, shall we? Okay, so yeah, another little Q&A came out regarding Starfield. The last one came out in October, and it was a Todd Howard Q&A with that one. And as with the previous one, this one's taken a few questions from Reddit, places like that, and basically they've pulled a whole bunch of them out and answered a few for us here. And there's some cool stuff in here, so what we got up first, random encounters was the first topic of conversation. People saying they really enjoyed it in Bethesda's previous games, be that Skyrim or Fallout. And yeah, obviously, we will get random encounters. So the feedback we're getting on this is that, as you can probably imagine, given the scale of Starfield, the random encounters are going to be correspondingly scaled up, which is really cool. So obviously, in Fallout or in Skyrim, let's get the name right, you wander around, you encounter dead bodies, living people, sometimes, very rarely, they have quests. You might get a wandering merchant, you might get somebody with a bit of history and something to chat about. Interesting little encounters. In this case, sounds like some of that will still be the case, but they've also gone big, because you've got a massive galaxy, only a proportion of which is actually inhabited, or at least we've got 1,000 planets, some of which will be inhabited, but most probably won't. So they've gone for a kind of almost a procedurally generated approach from the sound of things, which is really, really cool. So instead of just meeting random individuals, just about anywhere out in Starfield you'll be able to meet individuals or groups or, say, an outpost on an otherwise abandoned seeming planet or unoccupied seeming planet. There might be a group of people there, and where you might just go and chat to them and they'll have a little bit of dialogue or whatever in the past. Now it's going to be much bigger, and it can say you might find a group that might send you off on a quest to do something for them. Sort of a very light-ish, I'm guessing, side quest sort of vibe. So these things are going to be organic. They're kind of randomly spawning, so they can pop up just about anywhere. Obviously, within reason, you're not going to get a random outpost springing up in the middle of a town, but, you get the gist. And, yeah, the people there might send you off on a quest to another... Well, the term they used was dungeon, but obviously that basically means another generated location somewhere nearby wherein they want you to do a thing, whatever that might be. The example given was one of their group kidnapped by pirates. They think they're over there. So you've arrived just in the nick of time to help them out and go and rescue their group member from this group of pirates. And you'd go over there, find another place that the pirates are hanging out, go in, do your thing, probably with a machine gun, and bring the person out, as you'd expect. So that's pretty cool. It's brings sort of the quest system and it's the way it's existed in the past, together with the random encounter system, and uses it to kind of grow it out and make the whole thing more organic, which, given the scale of Starfield, is a really, really cool addition, I think. Without this, it would leave a lot of planets with very, very little to do, but the fact that random quests and encounters and things like this can pop up and give you stuff to do in places they might not pop up next time you visit is really cool, and it'll bring additional life to places that would otherwise be very empty. And that was a big talking point about the planets being empty, and obviously most of them would be. That makes complete sense, it's realistic. There obviously is that point in there where realism and fun video game kind of, they have to meet, So this kind of does that quite well. It means that as much as you get the opportunity to wander empty planets and, build your outpost on there, set up a base or whatever, you might also encounter a random quest that's just been generated by the game that may not be there in that place for somebody else, which is really, really cool. Going to give a lot more life and uniqueness to each individual playthrough. Obviously, we also know they've kind of drawn from the whole Skyrim lasting for as long as it has thing. The game's 10 years old, people still play it. It's 11 years old now. And they're expecting and hoping to facilitate that with Starfield. So the more organic popping up quests and things like that that are different each time you do it, that you can put in, the better. That's really, really cool, really interesting. And yeah, definitely should make for a nice, unique experience, which is cool. Definitely like the sound of this. So the next point that was quite interesting was that people pulled out the fact that in the footage we saw back in June, there is a little bit of a star map, and you see the Sol system kind of buzz past in that. And the obvious question from there was, can you go back and visit Earth? Well, there is a bit of footage in there that shows Mars, the surface of Mars, and a Mars rover that we've already seen. That was pretty easy to recognise in the June showcase. But as it turns out, we've also seen other stuff that comes from Mars. So you avoided spoilers here, but obviously humanity's gone out to the stars. Fairly early on, we will be going back to our current system, the Sol system, the home system, or as they call it, the old neighbourhood, which is quite cool. And finding out why humanity left for the stars. And we'll also be visiting Mars. One of the settlements that we saw in the footage, Cydonia, which we have heard about before, is basically, if not the first, one of the first human settlements off of Earth. There might be one on the moon, let's be honest. That's where our first stop's going to be IRL, so who knows? Maybe we'll see the ruins of one on there. But this will be an active, populated city with people living there, living their lives, with their problems and so on and so forth. Everything you'd expect from a big open-world RPG. One of these cities will be Cydonia on Mars. So we've seen little shots of this already, and the player walking around it looks very, very cool. Definitely another cool place to explore, and I'm looking forward to finding more about that. So, yeah, interesting to hear more about the home system, as it were. Just a little snippet, but cool. So, the next question was about factions, and the interesting thing here is, well, they kind of said, is it going to be more Fallout 4 or is it going to be more Skyrim? The idea being in Skyrim, you can join and complete every single faction's storyline, and though completing one doesn't lock you out of the other. You know, you can become, well, in Skyrim's case, head of every single guild or faction, whatever. You know, you can be head of the Mages Guild, you can be head of the Thieves, the Dark Brotherhood, blah, 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 blah. Whereas in Fallout 4, there's more conflict between the factions, so you can get in with each group for a while, but once you go down to a certain distance, the competing interests start shutting you out of other factions. If you're going to finish the game with the company of one particular faction, the other faction's probably not going to be standing beside you as well. So which route were they going to go down? Well, in this case, they seem to have gone more Skyrim than Fallout 4. They kind of overemphasised this a little bit, I think, because obviously you can join all the factions in Fallout 4, you just can't finish all the storylines because they start to shut each other out, as I say. In this case, the different faction storylines are not going to shut you out, which I'm kind of confused by. And the reason for that being, couple of examples here. You've got the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective, who very previously, or not that long before the time of this game, were in open war with each other. So those two you'd think would be kind of opposed to each other, and yet apparently you can join both and complete your story with each and not have a problem. Another example might be, say, the Crimson Fleet Pirates, or you can join another faction that I think is probably related to the United Colonies, but exactly how and which way, not quite sure yet. But you can join both of those factions, complete their stories, and be fine with that. But though there is one of the factions over by the United Colonies somewhere, or so it would seem, who are definitely out to get the Crimson Fleet and destroy them. So how is it that there does seem to be some conflict there, and yet there is kind of no conflict with what the player's doing. I'm not sure how this is going to work. It's a bit weird and was perhaps not as well explained as it could have been. But it's good to know you're not going to be shut out. We already know you're not going to be head of every single faction in Starfield. It's just not going to happen, you know. One of the factions you can join is I suppose it'd be the equivalent of a multinational, multiplanetary business, and you can work your way up in the business and work for them. For obviously the majority of people who start at the bottom in an established business, most of them do not become CEO. And that goes for the player in Starfield as well. So that sort of thing is going on. You're not going to be head of the factions. You'll influence the direction they're going, and you will have an impact on the choices they make, and the choices you make will have an impact on whether or not they're going to help you later on in the game. Kind of touching on a little bit of endgame, I think, there, that they may be involved. Not surprising, really. But also that you do have to make a few choices, and which way you go might affect the end, even though you can complete your story. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about how this works. I'm sure it will work in some way, but this is not the most clear and informative. One thing that is interesting, we do know that the timing and the setting of Starfield is in a period of relative peace. Relative. I mean, you've got pirates who are kind of always at war, you know how that goes. But in terms of, say, the war between the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective, they're not actually in open conflict at this point in time. They were a little while before, they're not now. Who knows what the future holds. But I think that one of the reasons for selecting that sort of in-between time of peace, but may not be completely allied or in good terms. You know, they're not in open war, but they're somewhere in between. I think the reason they've chosen that particular sort of setting and background is because it does have some conflict, but not so much as it then forces them to lock you out if you side with one side over the other, which is an interesting approach. Like I say, I really want to see how this actually pans out, because, yeah, okay, fine, you can join all them all and you do all the quests. Okay, that makes sense. That's easy enough to understand. Given the setting, how certain groups are not in conflict that would appear to be in conflict, like I say, police versus the pirates, that kind of thing. How can you join the police force and the pirates and that not be a problem? That is a big question mark at the moment for me, so I'm interested to find out how that's going to work. You know, you'd think those two would shut each other out, but it's good to know that we can do all of this, but also I'm left with as many questions as I have answers at this point, so we'll see what happens. But, yeah, questions... We don't want all the questions being answered before we go into the game, obviously, otherwise what's the point in playing the game? You know, that would be the spoiler thing, wouldn't it? So, yeah, definitely looking forward to exploring this, learning this world, and finding out what's going to go on with it, because it's going to be very, very interesting to get into, I think. So, the last couple of pieces on here are things that we've basically had explained before, so I'm a little surprised they've kind of gone over it again, but there's another spin on the same thing. So first up, that's companions. Obviously, we know we're getting them. We know there's at least one robot, possibly more, and as well as some human companions as well. We know that they're basically going to function as you'd expect companions in a Bethesda game to do. They'll follow you into combat, they'll shoot the things that are shooting at you alongside you, they'll carry your burdens, that sort of thing. And they will comment, they will have opinions on the choices you make, and your relationship with them will be affected. I don't know whether or not they'll actually leave if you make a choice they don't like. You'd think sooner or later, if you go far enough, if you go evil enough, someone who is not evil is going to be like, I don't like what you're doing and I'm out of here. But there's been kind of an implication that might not be the case. Or it may be that the system of sort of relationships with them is a bit more dynamic than that. Todd Howard talked about it in a recent interview, which I covered, so check up there if you want to have a look at that. But I think the gist of it is smaller things that they don't like will make them annoyed at you. But really big stuff that they cannot live with might cause them to leave. This makes sense, right? And it's more or less consistent with what they've done in previous games. And hey, it works well. Obviously with a new spin for Starfield, I am sure. So one of the cool things that is new that they've mentioned in here about companions is that they can get involved in conversations for you. They said basically speak for you, which it kind of sounds like you're giving up your control and your influence over this, which I suppose from the tone of things it seems you are kind of doing. But I think the example given was if you want to get into an area and there's a guard on the gate who says, no way, Jose, to you, you might be able to go elbow your companion and say, you got something you want to say to this guy to try and convince him to let us in? And your companion might succeed, and you might get in there. Or they might say the wrong thing, and the guy might pull out a shotgun at that point. So, you know, it depends who you're with, what situation you're in, and how they might respond. So, you can kind of take your chances with that, but it's an interesting dynamic, you know? That's the way these things could actually go down IRL, you know? You ask your friend for their opinion, and their opinion might cause you more trouble than it might solve, you know? It's theoretically possible anyway, so interesting dynamic, and it brings companions' role in... It gets companions involved in situations in a way that they otherwise might not have been, as opposed to being sort of passive observer who sits there and just kind of chatters in your ear about what they think about the way you're approaching things, you know? There's going to be a bit more to it than just that sort of stuff, so that's really cool, and I like that. More dynamic relationships is going to make this a more interesting living, breathing world, and that much more immersive, which is cool. So there's one other thing on the companions thing that was quite cool and mentioned kind of quickly, and that is that your companions will be part of the crew of your ship. Whether or not they'll be the entire crew or not, it's a little unclear. Some of the footage we saw back in June made it look like there was probably too many people in there for that to be the case. But who knows? Maybe it's just that almost everybody was there at the time. Either way, companions will help crew your ship, which makes me curious as to whether or not they'll have additional bonuses, because we know space combat's going to be a thing. Looking forward to trying that out. And we've got people like Vasco, the robot, and other companions as well. Maybe some of them will mean you can repair your ship better, or they'll repair your ship, or it has more shield strength or durability, or maybe they'll make your guns do more damage or something. I imagine they'll have some kind of bonus like that. Hopefully be a bit more interesting than that. bit more complex. That would be really cool, but I think at the very least it seems like they're going to have some influence on the way your ship functions, because this individual, whoever that individual may be, is crewing your ship, which is cool. So yeah, NPCs is the last thing that we have in here to talk about, and that is just a quick flying thing. Basically, a rerun of what Todd said last week, which, as I say, do check out the video if you haven't seen that one. But yeah, basically, NPCs will react to the choices you make. In Fallout 76 is a really good example of the current state of that at the moment. You walk into a settlement, somebody standing on the gate goes, "Hey, I know you. You did this cool thing." Or, "You've done all of this stuff. You're kind of a legend around here." That sort of thing. It's a very light touch thing. With Starfield, they want to make it more, so that it's more immersive and they're a bit more tailored to what you're doing, and they have opinions and comments to make that are a bit more involved than that. Or at least that's what it sounded like from what Todd was saying, and that makes sense, you know. You take something from a few years ago, and you expand it out, grow it, and make it more complex and interesting in subsequent games. So, yeah, looking forward to that. We also know it's going to affect later stages of the game. The choices you make, NPCs will... basically, it'll affect whether or not they're willing to help you later on. If you do something that screws them over, you're probably not going to be seeing them again, that sort of thing, which makes sense, really, you know. But that kind of ties into that faction thing that I was talking about before, as to the relationship you have with groups and individuals might affect how they pop up later in your story. Obviously, the exact details, well, we'll find out when the game eventually launches, which, yeah, my money's still on late May, early June. So there we go. Some cool little extra details about companions and NPCs and visiting the Sol system and Mars, which looks really cool, as well as a little bit of information about factions and what was the other thing again? Random encounters, yes. That sound really, really cool, and it does sound like they've engineered these sort of pre-existing systems, things we've seen before, and increased the sort of complexity and the dynamic nature of them so that they will make for a much more living, breathing world and work for a bigger one. As obviously we know, the world of Starfield is going to make previous Bethesda games look minuscule by comparison, just by dint of the number of different worlds we'll be visiting, if nothing else. So, yeah, really, really looking forward to getting into this. So, yeah, kind of interesting this has come along. I know we talked the other day about whether or not the absence of Starfield at the Game Awards meant a great deal. I think we can add to the conclusion of no. With the fact this post has come out, obviously this is Bethesda's little nod to say, yeah, we didn't show up at the Game Awards, we left it a week, and now we've put this out. So yeah, basically we're working on it, things are ticking along, and we'll do this in our own sweet time rather than on anybody else's schedule, which is very much the way Bethesda generally do things, and it frees them up to get things done, well, better really, rather than being rushed by somebody else's schedule, which is probably a good thing, so yeah. If you want to get my ins and outs in detail as to that whole thought, obviously I'll link up in the corner as well, so do check out the cards if you want to have a look at all the recent stuff we've had to say about Starfield and what we've learned and things like that. Do check it out, there's some cool stuff in there. In the meantime, I hope you're as excited for Starfield as I am. I know the next 6 months or so are going to be nowhere near fast enough for me. I'm definitely going to get my hands on this, but should be cool. In the meantime, if you did enjoy this and you want to keep up to date with any news and so on, do drop likes and subs. I do very, very much appreciate it. Notification bell as well. Then you'll know when I upload. If you get a chance, do join us for the Fallout content and the live streams as well. We are playing Fallout 76 as well at the moment. We are working our way through the Callisto Protocol as well at the moment, which has been an interesting experience, to say the least. And we'll see what's coming up next, because there's a whole load of very cool stuff coming out in the early part of next year as well. So lots of fun stuff lined up there. If you're interested, I'd definitely like to have you check that out. Do check out all the links down below as well. Social media links, merch store, channel memberships, all that good stuff if you're interested. And yes, for now, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to speaking to you all very, very soon.